Greetings, Pittsburgh. So I'm here actually at the invitation of the Heinz Foundation and the city of Pittsburgh, the mayor's office, to actually sort of come a second time. I was here, some of you may have seen the last time. So I'd like to actually show you what we have done sort of in the past year since I was here last. And maybe some of you know a little project that we've actually done in New York called the VIA. This is a project that combines a skyscraper with a courtyard to create a courtscraper, a brand new typology that now sits in New York. And just as Central Park is really the green lung of the city at an urban scale, we have basically miniaturized 13,000 times Central Park's proportions to create a courtyard inside a full city block in Manhattan. And now it's a space that actually is there for everyone that is in the building and in the city to enjoy. So it's in a way to think about our opportunities here today to create new typologies, new ways of living, new ways of working, of playing in our cities, because we now have the ability to sort of think about how we live, work, and play. I also showed you previously an energy plant that we're designing in Copenhagen. And yes, it puffs out smoke rings out at the top to basically signify every time a ton of carbon is burned in the plant, a puff smoke ring is puffed out to sort of say to us, to kind of communicate to us how we're actually interacting with our resources and how much we're using. If it's just a trail of smoke, there's no way to actually engage with the quantity. And there's a ski slope on top of this power plant because it's a power plant that provides energy for the city, but it's also an amenity for the rest of Copenhagen. It is now engaged with the city. It's not on the periphery or in the suburbs. It's not something that's a gray space on a map. It's something that's very vital. And this is now topped out and is getting its facade. And yes, we are going to be able to sort of put a puffer on top of the smokestack. I also showed you our project that came about after Sandy. This is, of course, about 3.5 years ago. It created about $20 billion of damage for the city. And we have been tasked with looking at a way to incorporate flood protection that at the same time also, again, serves the city on a much grander scale. So imagine a ribbon of protection 10 miles long on the periphery of New York that actually also is a park and offers tailored spaces for the neighborhoods that are adjacent to it. Imagine being able to ride your bicycle 10 miles in New York without ever crossing a street. So this is now also a project that has been funded for the first 2.5 miles fully, and will start construction next summer. And the next 3.5 miles are funded about half, and look to be also being fully funded in the next years to come. So something that I feel very proud of, being sort of able to sort of rethink what the coastline of Manhattan can be. And to, again, think about how the public realm, public space, actually invigorates a city. I think that landscape architects are the rock stars of our time, because if you think about New York, it is Central Park, it is the High Line, it is Battery Park, Brooklyn Bridge Park, the Hudson River Park. These are the areas in the city that have most recently actually created the kind of economic sort of investment and also increase the tax base in order for a lot of things to happen. Now, since I was here, we've become also involved here locally in the Lower Hill Master Plan project. This is a project that we did with the Penguins and McCormick Baron Salazar, who's been very active in Pittsburgh. The Lower Hill District, as many of you know, is an area that has been sort of over the time has really been cut off. This is one graphic that, if you look on the left, shows the Lower Hill neighborhood as it kind of connected to the downtown area and really provided a lot of affordable housing options at that time. And then in the 1950s and 60s, during the sort of Renaissance, there was also the desire to create movements. All cities in America were going through this. But that was basically a decision from our forefathers that has had decades of after effects. And I think that's also something important to remember when we're sitting in this room, is that our decisions matter. Our decisions have repercussions. So now there's the desire to actually restitch the Lower Hill District back with downtown, because that is a vital link. And we have gone through a sort of a 6-month process where we actually met with a lot of community groups. We probably met with a lot of you. We met with a lot of the city agencies like the URA and the SEA to look at how we can reinvigorate the Lower Hill district and sort of stitch it back. We found that the biggest obstacle was basically the topography, that because you have these steep slopes, when you place a grid on the lower hill as it moves up to the middle hill, you're looking at a 14% grade difference. That means that really no one wants to walk, you're not going to bike so much, and really you're going to privilege the automobile. So you're already basically saying that the streets rule. Everything else is subservient to the streets. We came up with the idea, what if we actually said that the biggest slope across the entire 28 acres was 5%? That would allow strollers, that would allow walkers, bikes, and people walking. So instead of thinking of what we normally do, which is to place a grid on the 28 acres, we looked at it as a crisscross set of paths, that the kind of the path network was the primary kind of organizational principle. Then we wanted to sort of create an organizational piece that basically created a pubic realm, basically a park that connected downtown across a cap and then meandering, zigzagging up the hill. So again, we would only have a 5% grade difference. It would then connect with Wiley Street up at the top and move into the middle hill. We also looked at a way to think about the heights so that everyone could actually have views, because the beauty of your topography in Pittsburgh is that it's really hard not to have a view. So we wanted to take advantage of that slope, that steep slope, to look at how we were going to organize the buildings and also preserve the views from the people that are already living up on the hill, the upper hill. And so we, just as we were thinking of creating a new typology in New York with the court scraper, we were thinking about what kind of building would make sense here in Pittsburgh. And what we came up with was, if you look at on your left, these are sort of the standard boxy buildings that you see everywhere when you sort of look out. What we propose is a kind of terraced building. That terraced building actually allows you to take advantage of the slope and to allow for terracing that allows for the indoor-outdoor movement of people and enjoying basically the views that are now able to be had. So it's in a way that you could, at this point, Pittsburgh has 150, 200 year or longer history, that you would be able to create a new typology that really takes advantage of that slope. And then you have commercial buildings that are getting taller and taller as they meet the city. So here is something that I'm really excited to also share with you, is that the Tiger funding, the federal funding for the CAP, has been approved. So basically that's the first step now to sort of cross that divide that was created by the interstate, and to actually then also get up to the hill. So we're really looking forward to these first projects as we integrate these principles and ideas into the planning that is already in place. Now, I know that Pittsburgh also is and finds itself as sort of a center of the autonomous vehicle. And there have been plenty of speakers that have sort of spoken about what that means to you. I would like to sort of show you what that means to your city in terms of space. We were asked by Audi. Audi is, of course, the German automaker. They were afraid because architects were showing the future and there were no cars in the future. It was only people riding, sort of bicycling and smiling and walking everywhere. And for Audi, it was like such fear that in 50 years there would be no automobiles. So they came straight to us, the source, and they said, please tell us, how do we get cars into your renderings? And so we basically said, we'll take this challenge, we'll listen, and we'll talk to you. So the 4 rings are actually 4 automotive companies that came together. And they're very proud of their sort of technical expertise. We said, and we asked them basically, what are you? And they said, we are a car company. And we said, nope, you're a mobility company. You could actually be auto bikes. You could be auto trains. You could be Audi blades, Audi driverless technology or driverless cars. The idea was that you could create an Audi experience no matter what mode of transportation that you would take. And they loved this idea. And we said that you could have the same sort of leather smell, the same clunk of the door, no matter what kind of mobility service that you took. So they asked us to do a little bit more research. So we took that as a challenge to sort of look at how we organize ourselves today. And this is basically a picture of the 405 in Los Angeles. We just add lanes. When you look at basically the history of automation, since the 1970s, there has been sort of more and more research in how cars can actually drive themselves. Here is a 1995 and 1998 sort of study of basically once you have cars that are basically automized, they know where they are in relationship to everything else. They no longer need the space on a interstate because the only reason that we have so much space between ourselves is that we don't know what the other driver is going to be doing. Now, that requires a lot of space. If we could actually create automobiles that basically take out that sort of question, then we could actually place a lot more cars into the same space. Now, we have been living with automized subway systems for decades. We have been flying on cruise control for even longer. Tom Cruise is in cruise control. So, basically this is something that is defined and we know. Cars have been using sort of anti-lock brakes, they've been self-parking. So basically this is something that's just sort of integrating itself into our society. When we look at cities, this is a city, Barcelona, that was built in the medieval period when people were walking. So the streets are crooked and narrow, and they're sort of moving in all directions. Same city, but now organized along the horse and cart, the buggy. So Barcelona, the grid, very famous, very beautiful, proportioned, but it's all based on basically riding around in a horse. Then we move to public transportation, Moscow, one of the sort of earliest subway systems. And here they created sort of garden cities where you would take the subway out into the suburbs, have a wonderful green park, and then you would have these sort of high rises that are going all around. Los Angeles is one of the first cities built after the car was invented. So you have basically an infrastructure that is purely car related. If we take the interchange of the 10 and the 405 and look at it, that is the same size as downtown Copenhagen, the medieval space. So imagine how much space we are taking up in just moving people in 4 different directions. Also, of course, there's the speed with which we travel. That also necessitates how long we need to actually change. We have been giving the kind of transportation engineers the rule of law of how our cities are actually organized. So our question is just, is there a new paradigm? Is there a new way of actually organizing our cities? We feel there is. Because as I mentioned to you before, when you have basically 4 cars right there using up that space because of how much distance needs to be between 2 drivers, we could pack 12 cars into the same space if they're autonomous. Now, we use 15% of our cities for roads, pavement, and getting people from one place to another. We could pack the same amount of people into 5%. That leaves 10% of our cities that could either be for growth, meaning there are more of us, or we can start to actually develop those 10% in a new way, to use that space in sort of a way that actually creates a more invigorating space. Now, I'm going to challenge you guys with Lower Hill Master Plan. Did you realize that those 28 acres don't require a single parking space in the building code? Because of its proximity to downtown, because of wanting to sort of also reinvigorate and support people moving. Now, do you think that, and the challenge is, do you think that people will actually build buildings that have no parking spaces? Perhaps not. But the possibility exists. You here in Pittsburgh could develop in the first buildings in the nation adjacent to a downtown area where the parking is not the sort of requirement, not the priority, not the sort of pushing mechanism of everything above it. You can take all of that space that you and money that you would spend in parking and actually create more affordable units and better places, better public realm. That's a space that you actually have at your disposal right here in Pittsburgh. So we then worked with Audi to think about how that future street or future space can be. People are okay with giving up driving. Just think about the yellow cabs in New York. And then we developed a street for the future. This is an example that we did where the car is driving and everything it's being sensed. So the arrow shows how the car is driving and how people and obstacles are reacting to the car and how the car reacts. So this is a smart street where you could imagine that the cars, or if there's an obstruction in front of the car totally stops. Once the obstruction leaves, the car can travel again. So this is a space, a place where we could create a new paradigm shift of how people move through the city, either in many fewer lanes, because now we can use the lanes more intelligently than just passive concrete and asphalt. So this is a challenge that I have for all of you. Thank you so much for allowing me to come for a second year in a row, and I look forward to seeing what happens in Lower Hill Master Plan. Thank you.